Ahoy! Today we're talking about the god who's been ruining everyone's casual games. It's Tsukuyomi. But this isn't going to be a balanced conversation this time. Instead, we are looking at the things that Tsukuyomi breaks, because there are a lot of those. I was trying to figure out multiple ways to counter Tsukuyomi, and I found some, so that video will come up in the next few days. But while working on that video, I realized there were a ton of things that were not working as expected, a ton of interactions where I was like, well, this should work differently, and that's what we're going to look into today, because this is a crazy amount of stuff that you wouldn't expect to work unless you've tested it. So I did what Alexi guessed here, and Teets and I went through all the interactions that we could think of for Tsukuyomi to see how they actually work, and this video is the result of that. We're looking at a general interaction, item interactions, and god interactions. The first one is one that has been reported to me I don't know how many times at this point. The ranged basic attacks that Tsukuyomi gets after his 1 and his 3 can actually be used against towers while outside of the tower range. I initially assumed that this was a bug, and I reached out to Hyres again today to ask why this isn't getting fixed or if this is still on their radar, because it's still not changed in the next patch. I kept quiet about this on here because I didn't want anyone to abuse this glitch and then potentially get in trouble for it. Turns out, this is not a glitch. It's actually intended that Tsukuyomi's ranged basic attacks can hit the tower from out of tower range due to the determined range that his basic attacks have. As such, you are not bug abusing when you utilize this mechanic to push towers. This surprised me a lot, and it may surprise a lot of you as well. But that's just how it's being ruled as of now. They say that this is a mechanic that's in the game that you can use, and if they don't like it at some point down the road, then they'll change it. To be fair, this isn't an overwhelming amount of damage if you're not specifically building for it as well, but it can still be useful if you're split pushing anyways. And that brings us to two quick item interactions. The first one is Purification Beads. I heard some rumors that supposedly you can cleanse Tsukuyomi's ultimate with that. That is not the case under any circumstances I tested, so they don't work against him. The second one is Shell. Now, Shell is technically a counter to his 1 and 3 to some degree, because it has the block stacks that come with it, 2 block stacks when the Shell is upgraded. So technically this would be a good tool to block the ranged basic attacks from his 1 and 3. The problem is that once the shield from Shell runs out from taking enough damage, the block stacks run out too. And typically against most targets, unless you have a very excessive defense, Tsukuyomi's 1 and 3 are basically enough to clear out that shell anyways, so that you will maybe block one of the basic attacks as best, but very rarely both of them. This can still be used if Tsukuyomi pre-stacks his ranged basic attacks before the fight, and then you have to use it right at the start, but that's very hard to tell in my opinion, so this is unlikely to make a big difference in most situations. And with that, we're moving to the, in my opinion, more interesting part, which is the gods, and we're starting with Ganesha because we're on him already, so might as well. In his case, I thought that the ultimate might be a really cool counter to Tsukuyomi if you stand on the line of your own ult and force him to dash back and forth on that. Unfortunately, Tsukuyomi does not register as being on the ground during his ultimate, so he will actually not take any damage at all. So that absolutely does not work, while some other abilities can actually hit Tsukuyomi. And speaking of abilities that don't work, the same thing applies for Anubis 3 and Ultimate. You will simply not deal any damage to him while he's ulting you, and only afterwards. This can still be good because he's kinda caught in both of your abilities at that point, but not nearly as good as it could have been. The next one is Apollo, and I'm just gonna show you the clip of testing this one with my initial reaction. Oh my god, this is fantastic. So yeah, that's most definitely an interesting one, and what you may have noticed there is that Tsukuyomi was dealing damage to Apollo while he was in the air, which is completely absurd in my opinion, because he's attacking him while on the ground, and then somehow teleports in the air anyway, so yeah, that makes sense. The next interaction was one that I thought would be extremely cool if it worked, because you could kinda abuse it to force him into your fountain, but unfortunately it doesn't seem to be the case unless you're super lucky. And that is using Heimdall's teleport to force Tsukuyomi to teleport with you if he ults you. Under normal circumstances, the duration is too long, so even if you had a teleport in base, it wouldn't work out. It could work at a shorter distance, of course, if you want to teleport him into your tower or something, but even then you have to time it very well. The next ability I absolutely expected to allow you to avoid Tsukuyomi's ultimate, and that is King Arthur's ultimate on another target, but that's not fully the case either. Of course, if you dash immediately, you get out of its targeting range and then it will not hit you, but if he hits you with one of the beams and you go up into the ult, he will still hit you from underneath. When it comes to Loki, I first wanted to see if his stealth can break the ultimate, so I didn't build Erendite for that either. It cannot. It just continues as if he was visible. Likewise, I wanted to see if an instant teleport makes a difference, because that would be relevant for quite a few guards like Thor and Susanoo as well, which I didn't want to test separately. It doesn't make a difference. He still follows you all the same, even through walls. For Naja, I wanted to see if his ultimate interacts differently from King Arthur's, because he goes higher into the sky. Again, doesn't make any difference. As long as you're ulting another target that's not Tsukuyomi, who's CC immune, you can get away from his ultimate if you avoid the beams, but if the beams hit you at all, then he will still attack you no matter where you are. In Sol's case, I was curious if her escape would actually allow her to avoid damage from Tsukuyomi's ult. While technically it does if you get to the point where you damage immune, you cannot effectively use it against the ultimate, because the windup is so long that by the time it's finished, Tsukuyomi has hit his entire damage of the ultimate on you. So unless you predict it and preemptively use the escape, you will still take the full damage. Sun Wukong was a god where I assumed his ultimate would most definitely make him immune to the damage and transfer the damage over to his clone. Of course, that's not happening. He is actually getting attacked by Tsukuyomi while up in his cloud, and Tsukuyomi entirely ignores his clone. That said, while the mechanic is irritating, I would still see potential for countering Tsukuyomi this way by using your ult for his ult and then just healing up afterwards. It's still not bad overall. When it comes to Thanatos, you know the drill at this point. This aerial ult will also make you take the full damage no matter where you fly, which looks absolutely ridiculous once again. And the same thing is obviously true for Thor as well. You know what would be cool? If Shang-Kui's ult could counter Tsukuyomi just a little bit by using it when he uses his ult, so that he takes some damage from your ghosts while he's attacking you, and you can maybe heal up a little bit if you have some lifesteal. And of course, because that would be a cool counter mechanic, it doesn't work, and instead Tsukuyomi just counters Shang-Kui's ult almost completely. But instead of these non-counters, there are also some partial counters. With some of these guards you would expect to fully counter him, and they only partially do that, or it's just very situational. The first one is Arachne. Here you have this typical situation where the ultimate will still follow her when she goes up, but at the same time she can avoid most of Tsukuyomi's ult by using her own ult and kind of make him waste that or has to focus that onto other targets. When it comes to Athena's ultimate, I thought that could be an interesting mechanic to force him to go somewhere else on the map to one of your teammates. This seems to work under very specific circumstances, like especially when he starts ulting you after you're already ulting away. But at the same time, it seems to be very conditional as well, because the timing is very clutch and you basically have to instantly teleport to someone else. For Camazotz, the same situation as Arachne applies. You can go up into the air and avoid damage, but if he hits you with the beams beforehand, you take damage, the usual. The same thing is also true for Chernobog's ultimate. Emphasis is on ultimate specifically here. Daji's ult also allows her to avoid part of Tsukuyomi's damage, but it takes a while to get up there, so you might be hit by 2 beams by the time you get up. Fafnir technically counters Tsukuyomi's ult if you go into the dragon form, because it avoids the beams, but if the beams have already hit you and you go into dragon form, he will actually hit you during your transformation. You're not damage immune, you're still gonna get hit by everything, which is also really weird, because basically almost nothing else can hit him at that point except dots, I think. When it comes to Freya's ultimate, same story as Arachne or Camazotz. You can avoid the beams and therefore the damage, but if the beams hit you, you take damage. When it comes to Hades, he can technically use his ultimate to avoid damage from Tsukuyomi, which in itself is a nice mechanic. But the problem is, if you start using the ultimate when Tsukuyomi is using his beams, then you will actually end up running out of your ult by the end of his ult and you're not gonna pull him, so it's basically a counter for a counter, so to speak. You can use Hades more effectively against him, though, more on that in the counter video. Habois is kind of a half counter. He doesn't actually counter Tsukuyomi's damage, he will still take the full damage while using his own ultimate, but at the same time, Tsukuyomi is forced into Habois' wave and the wave actually hits him. The interesting part is that during the dash, Tsukuyomi does not seem to have the damage mitigation anymore, so you actually hit him for the full damage, which is basically a free setup for Habois, especially if there's another enemy nearby as well. And then you can just combo him to death afterwards, I suppose. Huyi's 3 works like all the other aerial abilities. He can go into the air to avoid the beams, but if he gets hit, he takes damage. The standard stuff here. But it still works pretty well. Jing Wei works like Habois. If you use her ultimate, she will take the damage from Tsukuyomi while flying away, but she will also deal damage to him. I'm not sure what makes the difference here. I guess the damage targeters go above the ground or something, but both of these guys can do decent damage to Tsukuyomi that way. The Morrigan cannot counter Tsukuyomi with her decoy, and I was really hoping that would be the case, but for some reason he sticks to her and not to her decoy. She can counter Tsuku in other ways though. Nox's dash does not allow her to avoid Tsukuyomi's damage when going into an ally if hit by the beams beforehand, which I think is very weird and very unfortunate. However, at least if she already dashed into an ally and that ally is getting ulted, then she won't get hit by that. So as you can see, there are a lot of really weird mechanics, and in my opinion the ultimate follows through way more things than it should be able to, but of course there are some ways to deal with him as well. And that's what we're going to look at in a counter Tsukuyomi video soon. So if you're new to the channel, feel free to hit the sub button and maybe the bell so that you get notified of that video. There are like 1 or 2 other SMITE related videos that I'll make before that, but it should be in the near future. With that, thank you guys for watching. I hope to see you all for the next one soon. SLOTH out.